At 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, that would change everything. I was lying flat on my back in a crawl space that smelled of dry rot and 20 years of empty promises. I was troubleshooting why the brand new $15 zero zone climate control system in the executive suite was screaming like a jet engine with a terminal malfunction. A consultant had wired the compressor loop into the main panel of the server room. Nobody had bothered to check the amperage load. Nobody but me, of course. I knew every wire, breaker, and pipe in this building. I remembered the exact shortcuts some cheap contractor took when we expanded the East Wing back in 2014. I had spent 21 years keeping this building alive. At that exact moment, with a voltmeter in my hand and a flashlight held tight between my teeth, I had no clue that I had less than 3 hours before human resources would call me into a conference room to tell me I was redundant. Redundant is a funny word. It makes you sound like a backup generator. Nobody ever notices it until the main grid goes down, and then they suddenly remember why it was installed in the first place. My name is Daniel Vance. Dan, to anyone who has ever worked alongside me in these halls. I am 55 years old. I have been the chief building engineer at Apex Systems since 2005. Back when we started, there were only 5 employees, a single fax machine held together with electrical tape, and a business account with more hope than cash. Today, the company has 200 employees, ergonomic office chairs that cost more than my pickup truck, and a CEO who thinks building maintenance is just something that happens by magic. My morning started just like every other morning for the last 21 years. I unlocked the front doors at 6:47 a.m., exactly 23 minutes before anyone else arrived, using the original brass key. I kept that key on a heavy steel ring with 13 others. Each key was labeled in my own handwriting, representing a small piece of this building's history that existed only in my head. When I walked in, I found the cleaning crew had left a half-eaten takeout container in the sink. Someone from marketing had abandoned sushi in the break room fridge over the weekend, and a bottle of fermented tea had exploded. It was not my job, but I was the one who scraped the sticky liquid off the shelves at 7:00 a.m. I always felt like a load-bearing wall, invisible, ignored, and only noticed when something started to crack. I did it all in silence because that was how my father raised me. When I was 18, he handed me his 1958 Craftsman toolbox and told me to do the work right or not do it at all. I still kept that red metal toolbox in the back of my truck, with the socket wrenches organized exactly the way he had them. That toolbox meant more to me than any plastic plaque or bonus the company never gave me. Our current CEO, Stephen Miller, did not know the first thing about building operations. Steve could not tell a circuit breaker from a coffee maker. My work queue had over 4,000 unread tickets from people who could not change a light bulb without filing a request in triplicate. I handled them all. But things got worse when they brought in Justin Croft as the new Human Resources Director. Justin was fresh out of grad school, full of teeth, buzzwords, and expensive vests. He talked about cultural alignment like he had invented it. Once, he asked me where the internet cable went, and I told him it went to the same place his common sense was hiding. He did not appreciate the joke. I never went to a top-tier business school, and I never wore a suit that cost more than a car payment. But I knew this building. I knew which pipes groaned when a rainstorm was coming. I knew which thermostat on the 3rd floor would malfunction if the humidity went over 70%. I knew the main electrical panel would buzz like a rattlesnake if you opened the cover too quickly. I had kept this company running through power surges, pipe bursts, server room floods, and 3 different leadership changes. They just forgot. During an ice storm 3 years ago, I stayed in the building until midnight to keep the backup generators running, saving them over $200,000 in potential server data loss. The vice president at the time handed me a dry protein bar and told me I was a lifesaver. He did not even get my name right, calling me David. I stopped trying to correct them after a while. Then came the email on Monday afternoon at 4:58 p. It was sent by Justin Croft, just as I was replacing a ballast in the conference room. The subject line read, "Quick sync." There was no context, no explanation, just a calendar invite dropped onto my schedule. My gut went cold. I had seen enough people get escorted out of the building during corporate restructurings to know what that invite meant. I was next. I showed up the next morning at 9 a.m. sharp, wearing my blue work shirt with the Apex Systems logo and my clean work boots. Those boots had seen office floods, a minor warehouse fire, and 2 decades of history. They were my shield. Justin Croft was already waiting in the conference room, smiling like a salesman. Next to him was a corporate lawyer I had never seen before, who kept tapping a thick folder like it held secret documents. "Dan, thanks for joining us," Justin said, his voice entirely too bright. "We need to talk about restructuring our operations." I sat down and looked at the thick folder on the table. The word restructuring is just a polite corporate term for throwing people out to save a buck. I had seen the script before. First comes the fake smile, then the folder, and then a rehearsed apology that meant absolutely nothing. Justin Croft explained that the company was moving in a modern direction, optimizing our facility management by outsourcing the entire engineering department to a third-party vendor. I looked him dead in the eye and asked if that direction included my termination. He went quiet, and the lawyer slid the folder across the table. It was a standard severance package, 3 months of pay, a strict non-disclosure agreement, and health coverage until the end of the month. They even managed to spell my name wrong on the cover letter, addressing it to Daniel J. Vance. 21 years of service, and they could not copy my name correctly from the payroll system. The lawyer told me they would need my security badge, my building keys, and any company equipment in my possession by the end of the day. I took a deep breath, reached into my bag, and placed my plastic security badge on the table. Then I pulled out my heavy key ring containing all 14 keys. These were the keys I had carried for over 2 decades, the keys to every door, closet, and electrical panel in the facility. I held the ring up, looking at Justin. "Are you absolutely certain you want these?" I asked. He looked confused and gave me a practiced, sympathetic nod. "Yes, Dan, we need all company property returned today. It is just standard policy, nothing personal, nothing personal." I stood up, took the severance folder, and looked at the two of them. "You just escorted the only person who knows how to keep this building breathing out the door," I said. "Good luck when the winter storms hit." I walked out before I could say anything that would make me feel good for 10 seconds, but ruin my legal standing for the next 10 years. I did not go straight home. I pulled my truck into a quiet parking lot, shut off the engine, and sat there for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called Matthew Cole. Matt was my neighbor's boy. I had watched him grow up, and he used to mow my lawn for $20 and a cold soda. Now, he was a sharp commercial real estate lawyer with a reputation for dissecting contracts. He answered on the second ring, asking how I was doing. I told him I had just been laid off. Then I asked him if he remembered the original lease agreement we had looked over back in 2005. I heard a low whistle over the line. Matt asked if the company still had not updated the signature page. I told him they had not. I told him they just took my keys. Matt laughed, a dry, sharp sound. "They have no idea what they just did," he said. "When I got home, I went straight to my garage. I bypassed the standard filing cabinet and went to my father's red Craftsman toolbox. Under the heavy socket wrenches in the bottom drawer, I pulled out a thick yellow folder. It contained the original 2005 lease agreement, along with 7 amendments signed over the years. The document was worn and stained with coffee, representing 21 years of corporate history. My father had bought that red Craftsman toolbox secondhand in 1962 from a retired mechanic. He taught me that tools are like an extension of your own hands. If you treat them with respect, they will never fail you. I had cleaned and oiled those socket wrenches every year, preserving the steel just like he did. That toolbox was my anchor, and the papers inside were about to become my weapon. Back in 2005, Apex Systems was just a tiny startup. The founder, Walter Higgins, had begged me to co-sign the lease because the company had no credit history and the landlord would not lease to them. I did not co-sign it. I took the entire lease in my own name to get the deal done. Walter had promised we would transfer the lease to the company once they got funding, but we both forgot, and every subsequent renewal had been prepared by the property management office under my name. I was the sole tenant of record for the entire building. I turned to page 12, section 9B of the lease. It stated that any renewal of the lease term required written notice from the lessee to the property manager no later than 30 days prior to the expiration date. The lease was set to expire on August 1st. Today was August 3rd. I checked my records and called the property manager's assistant. No written renewal notice had been submitted. The current executives were so focused on their upcoming public offering and restructuring their staff that they had completely forgotten to renew the lease on their own headquarters. By failing to renew in writing, the lease had automatically converted to a month-to-month tenancy under California Civil Code Section 1946. This meant that as the lessee of record, I could terminate the entire tenancy with a simple 30-day written notice. I also checked the utility accounts, the main security system contract, and the HV maintenance agreements. Every single one of them was registered under my personal business name, which I had set up in 2005 to handle the building expenses. I was the entire foundation of their office, and they had just kicked me out. The next morning, I drove down to the property management office to meet with Jason Powell. I wore my clean work boots because I wanted my footsteps to sound solid on the marble floors. Jason looked up from his desk, surprised to see me. He knew me well, since I had been the one coordinating all the building maintenance, roof repairs, and lobby renovations for the last 2 decades. I sat down and laid the original 2005 lease agreement on his desk, along with the amendments and a letter drafted by my attorney, Matt Cole. I asked Jason to confirm if Apex Systems had submitted a written lease renewal by the July 1st deadline. He turned to his computer, clicked through a few screens, and frowned. "No," he said, "nothing has been filed. I assumed they were just letting it roll over, or that you were handling it like usual." I shook my head and pointed to Section 9B. I told him that since they had failed to renew, the lease had transitioned to a month-to-month agreement. Then I handed him the official termination letter. As the sole lessee on the contract, I was giving him my 30-day notice to terminate the lease, effective immediately. Jason stared at the paper, then looked at me. "Dan, if you terminate this lease, the company has no legal right to occupy the building," he said. "They will have to vacate." I told him that was correct. I also told him that I had already found a replacement tenant who was ready to sign immediately. For the past 6 months, I had been talking to Sarah Jenkins, the founder of Solace Wellness. She was looking for a downtown space for her expanding health and wellness centers, which focused on yoga studios, meditation rooms, and executive health services. She had plenty of venture capital backing and was looking for a flagship location. She was willing to pay triple the rent Apex Systems was currently paying. I had told her to wait until the summer, knowing that the company's lease was up for renewal and they were too distracted to notice. Sarah wanted to convert the heavy server rooms into quiet meditation spaces and the open cubicles into private yoga studios. She wanted the HVAC system upgraded to include medical-grade HEPA filters, which was a project I was highly qualified to oversee. We negotiated a consulting retainer, where I would manage the building's physical transition for an additional fee, securing my financial future before Apex Systems even knew they were being displaced. Jason looked at the financial projection I handed him. The numbers were clear. Solace Wellness was offering $75,000 a month compared to the $25,000 Apex Systems was paying. From a business perspective, it was a simple decision. He accepted the notice and signed the acknowledgement. He told me he would notify the owners, but that the paperwork was legal and binding. I went back to my truck and submitted the official notice to vacate through the county court portal, paying the fee to expedite the process. When I returned home, I checked my email. There was a message from Justin Croft in HR. He was asking me to confirm that I had returned all company property, including keys, manuals, and records. I replied to the message, copying the CEO, Stephen Miller. I wrote, "I have returned all company property, including the items you forgot I legally control." My finger hovered over the send button for a moment. I felt a brief flash of hesitation, thinking of the early days when we all worked as a team. But then I remembered the cold, blank look on Justin's face and the corporate lawyer's hand stroking the folder. I pressed the button, confirming my exit from their world. I sat in my garage for a long time looking at the old photos on the wall. I thought about Walter Higgins, the founder. His daughter Lily used to run around the office when she was a little girl. She had even drawn a crayon picture on the margin of our 2009 lease amendment. Walter had been a good man, but he retired in 2018 and left the company in the hands of professional managers who only cared about numbers on a spreadsheet. They did not care about the history, the late nights, or the sweat that went into building the company. I remembered what my father told me when he gave me his tools. He said that a man should always take pride in his work, but he should never let himself become a rug for others to wipe their boots on. I was not doing this out of malice. I was doing it because they had decided that loyalty had no value. If I was redundant, then my lease was redundant too. I was just taking back what belonged to me. That night I slept better than I had in years. The worry and the anger were gone, replaced by a calm certainty. The legal machinery was in motion, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. They had built a massive company on top of my name, and then they had cut the support beams. Now they were about to learn what happens when the foundation walks away. I knew that within a few weeks, the office they took for granted would no longer be theirs, and the realization would hit them like a physical blow. I poured myself a small glass of whiskey and watched the rain hit the garage window. Feeling completely at peace with the choice I had made, the official legal documents were delivered to the office on Thursday morning at 9:15 a.m. The county sheriff's deputy handed the certified envelope containing the eviction notice to the receptionist, Chloe. Chloe was a temporary worker who spent most of her time on her phone. She probably saw the legal letterhead, assumed it was standard junk mail, and placed it in the back of the mail rack behind some catalogs. The office had been buzzing with preparation for the upcoming public offering. Employees were running around with folders, schedules, and promotional materials. The company's legal department was reviewing regulatory filings and compliance checklists, preparing to launch the initial public offering next month. Nobody was paying any attention to the mail or the facilities, leaving the legal letters to sit unopened. By noon, the office was in complete disarray. Employees gathering in small groups near the coffee stations, ignoring their emails and discussing where the company would move. Rumors were flying that the board was considering replacing Stephen as CEO because of the oversight. The momentum they had built for the public offering was completely gone, replaced by panic. On Monday morning at 8:08 a.m., Justin Croft walked up the front steps of the building. He stopped in his tracks. A bright orange laminated notice to vacate was zip-tied to the main glass doors. The notice was stamped by the county court, declaring that the occupant of suites 201 through 221 had 72 hours to vacate the premises due to lease termination. Justin tried to pull the notice off, but the thick plastic zip ties held it fast. By 8:30 a.m., the CEO, Stephen Miller, arrived. He saw Justin pacing in front of the doors while several employees stood around, whispering and taking photos. Stephen shoved past them, read the notice, and went pale. He yanked the paper until the zip tie snapped and stormed into the lobby, demanding to know what was going on. He called Jason Powell, the property manager, demanding an explanation. Jason told him that the lease had been legally terminated by the tenant of record and that they had 72 hours before the locks would be changed. Stephen shouted that the company had been paying the rent for 21 years and that they were the tenants. Jason calmly explained that the lease was in the name of Daniel Vance and that the company had failed to submit a written renewal. He cited the statute of frauds under California Civil Code Section 1624, which requires all commercial leases longer than 1 year to be in writing. There was no valid contract between the property owner and Apex Systems. By 10:20 a.m., their legal department had pulled the records. The lead attorney called Stephen and confirmed the worst. Daniel Vance was the sole lessee. The company was technically trespassing. My phone rang at 7:42 p.m. on Tuesday. I was in my garage, polishing the socket wrenches in my father's 1958 toolbox. The caller ID showed Stephen Miller's name. I let it ring 3 times before I picked up and put it on speaker. "Daniel speaking," I said. "Vance, what the hell is this?" Stephen yelled. "You cannot evict us. We have 200 employees and a public offering next month. You are violating your duty to the company." I took a sip of water and leaned back against my workbench. I do not have any duty to the company, Steve, I said. You terminated my employment last Tuesday because you said my position was redundant. I was just following your lead. I decided to clean up my personal assets, which includes the lease for the building you are currently occupying. This is illegal, Stephen stammered. We will sue you for damages. We will tie you up in court for years. I told him to talk to his legal team first. I explained that under California Civil Code Section 1946, a month-to-month commercial tenancy can be terminated by either party with 30 days' notice. The notice was served, the 30 days had passed, and the county court had issued the eviction order. There was nothing to dispute. I had already leased the space to a new tenant who had paid the deposit. Stephen was silent for a few seconds. I could hear the faint murmur of voices in the background, likely his lawyers advising him to remain calm. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted from anger to desperation. He reminded me of the time we had worked together during the early expansion, trying to appeal to my sense of history. I told him that history died when they spelled my name wrong on a severance sheet. I told him it was too late for adjustments. You should have checked the name on the lease before you handed me that folder, I said. You wanted me out of your building, and now I am out, and I am taking the building with me. Have a nice move, Steve. I hung up the phone and went back to my tools. The silence in the garage was peaceful, a stark contrast to the storm I knew was raging inside the executive offices of Apex Systems. I knew they would spend the night packing files, but that was no longer my concern. The scene on Wednesday morning was something I will never forget. U-Haul trucks were lined up along the curb, and movers were carrying office chairs, computer monitors, and boxes of files down the front steps. Employees stood on the sidewalk, looking lost. The moving day was pure chaos. The street was blocked by 3 large moving vans, and the movers were rushing back and forth carrying filing cabinets, boxes of documents, and servers. The cooling fans for the server racks were silent, and the entire office looked like a ghost town. Employees were standing around the sidewalk, whispering to each other, unsure if their jobs would survive the sudden relocation. Justin Croft was sweating in his Patagonia vest, shouting into his phone, while Stephen Miller glared at the court officers who were supervising the eviction. Stephen Miller was pacing near the loading dock, arguing with the moving supervisor. He looked like he had not slept in days. At one point, he got so frustrated that he grabbed a plastic folding chair and threw it against the side of a truck. The chair bounced off with a loud bang, and several employees immediately pulled out their phones to record the meltdown. Within hours, the video was circulating on local business blogs. I drove by the building at 3:47 p.m. just to see the final stages of the relocation. The last truck was pulling away from the curb, its taillight cracked. The building that I had spent 21 years maintaining was empty. Through the glass doors, I could see the lobby was bare, the carpets showing the faded outlines of the desks that used to sit there. Sarah Jenkins and her team from Solace Wellness were already standing in the lobby, carrying blueprints and tape measures. Sarah saw my truck, walked out to the curb, and waved. "We are ready to start the renovations tomorrow, Dan," she said, smiling. "Thanks for making this happen." I nodded and told her the building was in good shape, but to watch the pressure valve on the main water line during the winter. She thanked me and said they were glad to have someone who knew the property helping them. 2 days later, my old colleague Roy Peterson called me. Roy was an assistant technician who had worked with me for 5 years. He told me he had resigned from the company. He said he could not work for executives who would treat a veteran engineer like garbage. He asked what I was planning to do next. I told him I was starting my own facility management consulting business. I asked him if he wanted to join me, and he accepted immediately. Roy and I rented a small, modern office space just 3 blocks from the old headquarters. We brought my father's 1958 Craftsman toolbox there and placed it in the center of the workshop as a symbol of our standards. Our first client was the building across the street, which was having issues with its fire sprinkler systems. Once we fixed that, word spread quickly. We didn't need to advertise. The story of the engineer who evicted his own employer had become local legend in the commercial real estate community. Property owners realized that having a competent engineer who understood the physical systems and the legal contracts was worth every penny. Our new office became a hub for local property managers. We had a large chalkboard on the wall where we listed our active projects, and my father's old red toolbox sat on a sturdy wooden bench near the door, a reminder of where we came from. Roy handled the day-to-day inspections, while I focused on contract consulting and complex system diagnostics. We were no longer just technicians, we were trusted advisors. Within 3 months, our new consulting firm had signed contracts with 4 major office buildings in the downtown area. The building owners had heard about the eviction and wanted to hire someone who actually understood how to manage facilities and protect their assets. We were making double our old salary, setting our own schedule, and working with clients who respected our expertise. Every contract I sign now is reviewed by Matt Cole, and I make sure my name is spelled correctly on every document. Yesterday evening, I stood in my garage and looked at the wall next to my father's photo. I put up a small brass hook and hung the original 2005 office key on it. It is not there to remind me of the anger or the betrayal. It is there to remind me that a building is only as strong as its foundation, and the people who do the work are the ones who hold it up. I stood there in the quiet of my garage, the cool evening air carrying the scent of cut grass. I looked at the brass key hanging on the hook, its polished surface catching the light. It was a small thing, just a piece of cut metal, but it represented the boundary between being used and being respected. Stephen Miller and Justin Croft thought they could replace me with a cheaper vendor and a fresh coat of paint. They forgot that the wires, the pipes, and the contracts all run through the people who care about the work. They wanted me redundant, but they ended up proving I was the only thing keeping them standing. Now, they are operating out of a cramped business park on the edge of town, and we are busier than ever. The work goes on, but now it is for people who remember to say thank you. I am glad I did not stay quiet. Sometimes you have to let the building fall to show them who was holding it up.